If you are a farmer trying to sell country right now, this is the hardest market in over a decade. If you are a family watching grocery prices climb while interest rates go back up, what is happening in the farmland market helps explain why the pressure is not letting up. And if you live in a regional town that depends on agriculture, where the stock and station agent, the solicitor, the fencing contractor, and the machinery dealer all rely on land changing hands, the numbers we are about to go through should concern you. In 2021, more than 10,500 parcels of Australian farmland changed hands. By 2025, that number had fallen to just 5,408. That is a 50% collapse in transaction volumes in 4 years. According to Ray White's head of research, Vanessa Rader, that decline reflects the lingering effects of elevated interest rates, keeping buyers cautious, even as sellers maintain firm price expectations. Fewer transactions means fewer farms changing to productive new owners, properties sitting unsold for longer, and regional economies that depend on land turnover doing less business. The agents, the solicitors, the stock and station firms, the contractors who come in after sale, they are all feeling it. And the consolidation of Australian farmland is accelerating in ways that will reshape who owns the land and what gets done with it. Prices, though, did not collapse with the sales. They went the other way. Ray White reported the national median farmland price finished 2025 at $10,979 per hectare, a record. Bendigo Bank Agribusiness put it at $10,516 per hectare, also a record, marking a 12th consecutive year of growth. Values have nearly tripled since 2010. Prices are at all-time highs while the number of buyers has halved. That is a market where almost nobody is selling because they do not have to, and almost nobody is buying because they cannot justify the cost. Bendigo Bank's first half 2025 data showed the national median dipping slightly to $9,885 per hectare, the first time in more than a decade that values had flatlined across a first half period. Only South Australia and New South Wales recorded growth. The rest of the country trended lower. The 5-year average for first-half transactions sits above 4,100 sales. In 2025, that number came in at 3,104. That gap is not closing. Ray White's chief economist, Narita Konisby, put it plainly. Transaction volumes have collapsed to their lowest levels. This suggests low levels of distress. No one is being forced to sell, but also lower levels of buy demand. The result is paralysis. Price stability, sitting on top of market inactivity. And when that inactivity stretches long enough, it starts to affect the people and communities around it. The causes stack up in layers. Start with interest rates. The Reserve Bank cut the cash rate 3 times in 2025, in February, May, and August, bringing it down from 4.35% to 3.6%. That was supposed to give rural borrowers breathing room and encourage buyers back into market. Rabobank projected a return to modest growth. Buyers were expected to capitalize on weaker land values. Instead, inflation picked up again in the second half of 2025, driven in part by the Middle East conflict pushing up fuel and commodity prices. The RBA reversed course with 3 consecutive hikes in February, March, and May 2026, pushing the cash rate back to 4.35%. The May decision was carried 8 votes to 1. Every basis point of relief delivered in 2025 has now been taken back. For anyone budgeting on lower rates to make a land purchase work, the numbers no longer add up. Vanessa Rader stated that the RBA's decision to raise rates in February 2026, reversing a period of cuts through 2025, added further constraint on buyer appetite. She noted the focus was shifting to refinancing and debt restructuring rather than land acquisition. March quarter inflation came in at 4.6%, the highest reading since September 2023. That is the number that forced the RBA's hand in May, and the number that keeps rural borrowing costs elevated heading into winter. Then there is the weather. The Bureau of Meteorology reports that southern Australia has recorded below-average cool season rainfall in 26 of the last 32 years. That is not a bad run. That is a structural shift. A drought that began in 2023 persisted through 2025 and into early 2026. December 2025 through February 2026 brought extreme heat and record low rainfall across southern regions. Victoria was hit hardest. Bendigo Bank noted that Victoria's farmland performance was down 0.4%, subdued by dry conditions and cautious buying. Victoria's 856 transactions for the year reflected the challenges in southern growing regions. 5 of 7 regions in Western Australia recorded year-on-year declines in median price during the first half of 2025 as producers grappled with record rainfall deficits. In northeast New South Wales and southeast Queensland, root zone soil moisture remained among the driest nationally as late as April 2026. Some water storages across eastern and southern states have dropped by up to 50% of capacity. Adelaide's single desalination plant quadrupled its output from January 2025 to meet demand after 3 extremely dry years. Melbourne's dams fell to their lowest levels since the tinderbox drought. That is the backdrop against which buyers are being asked to pay record prices for land. The divergence between states is just as telling. While Victoria and Tasmania saw values fall, Queensland's farmland prices rose 10.6% on the back of stronger cattle and sheep prices. Western Australia posted a 30.5% jump, driven by a standout cropping season. South Australia gained 25.6%, partly catch-up after earlier underperformance. The national average masks a market that is fracturing along regional lines. As Rader put it, location, land type, production capability, and timing matter more than ever. On top of the drought came the fires. The 2025 to 2026 bushfire season burned more than 436,000 hectares across Victoria alone, destroying over 1,590 structures. Premier Jacinta Allen declared a state of disaster across 18 local government areas in January 2026. The fires hit during Victoria's longest heatwave since 2009. Agricultural facilities, including cool stores, were damaged. The Skipton fire burned directly through grassland and farmland. 5 people died nationally across the season. For a state already dealing with drought and low buyer interest, widespread bushfire damage only deepened the reluctance to transact. And then the trade shock. On New Year's Day 2026, China's Ministry of Commerce imposed a 55% tariff on beef imports exceeding quota levels. Australia was allocated 205,000 tons under a total quota of 2.7 million metric tons. Total Australian beef exports to China in 2025 were around 265,000 tons, meaning roughly 1/4 of shipments would be exposed to the tariff. The Australian Meat Industry Council estimated the restrictions could reduce exports to China by about 1/3, equating to more than $1 billion in lost annual trade. AMIC Chief Executive Tim Ryan said the decision would have a severe impact on trade flows and disrupt the relationships fostered under the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. The tariffs apply to all beef exporting nations, but for Australian cattle producers, particularly in Queensland and northern New South Wales, who built business plans around the Chinese market, the timing was punishing. It arrived just as drought was already forcing increased turnoff. According to Elders' April 2026 cattle market update, since peaking in early March, cattle values slumped 7 to 20%, with restocker heifers and cows most affected. The National Heavy Steer Indicator fell 12%, forced selling into a market already unsettled by trade disruption compresses margins from both ends. Against all of this, the macro picture still shows Australian agriculture at a record. A Bears forecast the gross value of agricultural production at $101.4 billion in 2025 to 2026, hitting the National Farmers Federation's $100 billion target 4 years ahead of schedule. NFF President Hamish McIntyre said the milestone was earned through droughts, fires and floods, through a pandemic and global trade disruption. The second largest winter crop on record came in at over 66 million tons. Beef exports rose 29% to $17 billion in 2024 to 2025. The Eastern Young Cattle Indicator averaged 762 cents per kilogram through 2025, up 22% on the 2024 average. NSW beef exports to the United States surged 256% in 2 years to reach $784 million, partly filling the gap left by the U.S. herd sitting at 70-year lows. But a bears also forecast production value falling 6% to $95 billion in 2026 to 2027, as livestock prices ease and crop volumes normalize. The gross value of cattle slaughter and live exports is expected to drop 14% to $19.6 billion. Agricultural export value is projected to fall 9% to $73 billion. Average broadacre farm business profit is expected to decline. The record is already behind us. And for the farmland market, that means the income underpinning land values is softening just as borrowing costs are rising. At the same time, the composition of who is buying farmland is shifting. Foreign investors held 50.26 million hectares, 13% of Australia's total agricultural land, at June 2025, up from 12.7% a year earlier. 87% of that land runs livestock. Institutional capital from pension funds and asset managers continues to flow in. Canada's PSP Investments acquired over 8,000 hectares in New South Wales for $70 million. Nuveen Natural Capital, backed by America's TAE, manages 350,000 hectares across 4 states. A Farm Weekly investigation in August 2025 reported that Alkira Farms, a subsidiary of U.S.-based Farmland Reserve, the investment arm of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, spent approximately $490 million acquiring properties across Queensland and New South Wales. Those purchases were not scrutinized by FIRB because U.S.-owned entities benefit from a screening threshold of $1.46 billion under the Australia-United States Free Trade Agreement, compared with $15 million for most other foreign investors. Grain Producers Australia called for the rules to be examined. Shadow Agriculture Minister David Littleproud said the purchases did not reflect the agreement's intent. As things stand, the RBA cash rate sits at 4.35%, with the next decision due in June. Inflation is running at 4.6%. Drought conditions have eased in parts of the south, but persist in northeast New South Wales and southeast Queensland. The Bureau of Meteorology has flagged possible El Niño conditions later in 2026, which would make things worse. Farmland transactions remain near historic lows. Buyers who do remain are selective, prioritizing water security and land quality over expansion. As Bendigo Bank's Eliza Redfern put it, widespread uniform growth has fallen, and buyers are now more discerning. The era of broad-based farmland growth is over. What replaces it is a fractured market where location, rainfall, land type, and access to capital determine everything. And for the farming families and regional communities caught on the wrong side of those dividing lines, the consequences are already being felt. Subscribe.